The sharp crack of a gunshot ripped through the midday hum of Redemption, Colorado. Glass exploded from the bank's front window, showering the dusty street in glittering shards. Women screamed, and men dove for cover behind water troughs and hitched wagons. Inside the First Redemption Bank, Willie Wren reacted a split second too late. He'd been standing at the teller's cage, his mind on the price of winter feed, when 3 masked men had burst through the doors. Now he was on the floor, one arm thrown protectively over his 4-year-old daughter, Rose. "Stay down," he growled, his voice a low rumble against the cacophony of shouts and threats. Rose whimpered, her small body trembling beneath his. The air, thick with the smell of gunpowder and fear, was a toxic cloud. One of the bandits, a hulking figure with a shotgun, herded the terrified customers into a corner. Another, wiry and quick, vaulted over the counter, stuffing fistfuls of cash into a canvas sack. The third, clearly the leader, stood watch by the shattered window, his pistol waving menacingly. "Anybody moves, they get a free ticket to the Undertaker," the leader barked. Willie's hand instinctively drifted toward his hip, but his Colt was in its holster on his saddle, a foolish oversight in a town that was growing wilder by the day. He cursed himself silently. Since his wife Eliza's death 2 years prior, he'd let his guard down, retreating into the solitary work of his ranch and the all-consuming nature of his grief. He had forgotten that the world was still a place of sudden, brutal violence. A stray dog, spooked by the noise, darted across the street, drawing the leader's attention. He fired a shot in its direction, more for sport than anything else. The bullet ricocheted off a hitching post, screaming back through the broken window. It whined past Willie's ear, a hornet of hot lead, heading straight for Rose. Time seemed to warp, stretching into an impossibly slow crawl. Willie saw the path of the bullet, saw his daughter's wide, terrified eyes, and knew he couldn't move fast enough. A strangled cry escaped his lips, a sound of pure paternal terror. Then from the corner where the hostages huddled, a figure moved. A woman dressed in a simple, travel-worn dress threw herself forward. She moved with a desperate, surprising grace, her body a shield between the bullet and the child. The lead slug tore through the wooden wall inches from her head, but in her lunge she collided with the second bandit, who was scrambling back over the counter. He shoved her hard, and the butt of his rifle caught her square on the temple. She crumpled to the floor without a sound, a dark crimson stain blooming in her dark hair. As she fell, a small object slipped from her grasp, skittering across the grimy floorboards. It was a silver locket on a delicate chain, dented and tarnished. It came to rest near Willie's boot. "Get the rest," the leader yelled. The chaos resumed its frantic pace. The bandits grabbed their sack and bolted from the bank, firing a few more shots into the air as they mounted their horses and galloped out of town. For a moment, an eerie silence fell, broken only by the sound of sobbing. Willie's entire world had narrowed to the small, still form of his daughter. "Rose," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, her face buried in his chest. "The lady saved me, Papa." He looked over at the woman unconscious on the floor. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. Gratitude, fierce and overwhelming, washed over him, followed by a surge of responsibility. She had saved his daughter. He owed her a debt that could never be fully repaid. He scooped Rose into his arms, then knelt beside the woman. It was then that he saw the locket. He picked it up. It was warm from her body. His thumb, rough and calloused, brushed away the grime from its surface. The front was etched with a delicate floral pattern, but it was the image inside that made his breath catch in his throat. It wasn't a portrait. It was a tiny, faded sketch, intricately detailed, of a mountain range, 3 distinct peaks, with a sharp, jagged drop-off on the rightmost one. It was the view from his own front porch, the spitting image of the unforgiving peaks that bordered his land, to the very same mountains that had claimed his wife. A cold dread mingled with a profound and unnerving curiosity settled deep in his gut. This woman, this stranger who had appeared from nowhere and risked her life for his child, carried a piece of his world in a locket. The connection was immediate, mysterious, and powerful. The town doctor was good with broken bones and fevers, but Willie knew with a certainty that defied logic that this was not a matter for the town. This was something he had to take home. Gently, he lifted the unconscious woman into his arms. Her head lolled against his shoulder, a dead weight. "It's all right, Rose," he murmured more to himself than to his daughter. "We're taking her with us." The woman, whose name he didn't know, remained unconscious for the journey back to the ranch. Willie had laid her carefully in the back of his supply wagon with Rose sitting beside her, stroking her hand. The sun beat down on the cracked earth, and the air shimmered over plains dotted with skeletal mesquite trees. Dust, fine as red flour, coated everything, a constant reminder of the harshness of the land. It was a world of sharp edges and muted colors, a landscape that mirrored the state of Willie's own heart. His ranch was his fortress, nestled in a high valley, where the plains gave way to the foothills of the Rockies. The log house, built by his own hands, was sturdy and unadorned. The barn stood sentinel beside it, and the corrals were neat and well-maintained. It was a place of order and solitude, a world he had painstakingly constructed to keep the chaos of loss at bay. Now he was bringing the chaos home. He carried her inside and laid her on the spare bed in the room that had once been a nursery. He cleaned the gash on her temple with a gentle hand, surprised by the fineness of her skin. She had the calloused hands of a worker, but a delicacy to her features that seemed out of place. Rose refused to leave her side, sitting on a small stool, her gaze fixed on the woman's still face. She finally stirred as dusk painted the mountains in shades of bruised purple and soft rose. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of moss after a rain. They were filled with a deep, bottomless confusion. Where am I?" she whispered, her voice raspy. "You're safe," Willie said, his tone more gruff than he intended. "You're at my ranch. There was an incident in town." She tried to sit up, a flicker of pain crossing her face as she touched her head. "Incident? A bank robbery. You were hurt." He decided against mentioning her act of heroism just yet. "You saved my little girl." Her gaze drifted to Rose, who offered a small, shy smile. The woman's expression didn't soften with recognition. It only deepened with bewilderment. She looked at her own hands, as if they belonged to a stranger. "I don't remember." "What do you remember?" Willie asked, his voice low. She squeezed her eyes shut, a frustrated sigh escaping her lips. "Nothing. Just waking up here. I don't know my name. I don't know how I got to that town. It's all blank. A white wall. Amnesia." The doctor in town had warned him it was possible after a head injury. It felt too convenient, like something out of a dime novel. Yet the raw fear in her eyes felt genuine. He watched her, his stoicism a mask for the churning conflict within him. He was a man who trusted what he could see and touched the heft of an axe, the solid warmth of a horse, the certainty of the changing seasons. This woman was an unknown quantity, a living mystery deposited on his doorstep. Over the next few days she healed. The wound on her temple began to fade, but her memory remained a void. She chose a name for herself, Mira, plucked from a book of poems on Eliza's shelf, because she liked the sound of it. She was quiet and hesitant, moving through his house like a ghost, her footsteps light on the floorboards. She tried to make herself useful, her hands finding familiar rhythms in chores she couldn't recall learning. She mended a tear in Rose's dress with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. She calmed a spooked colt in the corral with a soft murmur and a steady touch that surprised even Willie. Rose, however, had no such reservations. The child who had been withdrawn and somber since her mother's death blossomed in Mira's presence. She followed her everywhere, chattering endlessly, her laughter echoing in the quiet house once more. One evening, As Mira was tucking her into bed, Rose reached up and touched her cheek. "You smell like my mama's garden," she whispered, "like rain on the roses." From the doorway, Willie watched his heart a tight, aching knot in his chest. His daughter was giving her heart to a ghost, a woman with no past. Yet he couldn't deny the light she brought into their shadowed lives. He was torn between a fierce protective suspicion and the undeniable gratitude that bloomed every time he saw his daughter smile. Meanwhile, a new presence was making itself known in Redemption. A man named Silas Kane had arrived flush with cash and southern charm. He was buying up failing homesteads, his talk filled with grand plans for the valley. He was handsome, eloquent, his words smooth as polished riverstones. But when Willie saw him in town one day, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Kane's eyes, a pale, cold blue, seemed to see too much. He had a way of looking at a man as if he were sizing him up for a coffin. A week after the robbery, Kane and 2 of his hired men rode up to Willie's property line. Willie met them at the fence, his rifle held loosely in one hand. "Mr. Wren Kane," said his voice a rich baritone with a distinct southern drawl. He tipped his hat. "Silas Kane. I've been admiring your spread. A fine piece of land. That mountain view alone is worth a fortune." "It's not for sale," Willie said flatly. Kane's smile didn't falter. "Everything has a price, my friend. I'm prepared to be most generous. A man alone with a young child. This is a hard life. I could offer you an easier one." "I'm not looking for easy," Willie replied, his gaze unwavering. Kane's eyes flickered past Willie toward the house where Mira was hanging laundry on the line, the breeze catching her dark hair. A flicker of something recognition calculation passed through his gaze before being masked by his easy smile. "I hear you've taken in a stray," he said, his tone deceptively casual. "A charitable act. But charity can be a dangerous investment in these parts." The veiled threat was unmistakable. Willie's hand instinctively drifted to the worn handle of the Colt at his hip, a gesture he hadn't made in years. "I decide who's dangerous on my land," said his voice low and cold. Kane simply chuckled, a sound that held no warmth. "A man of principle. I do admire that." He gathered his reins. "My offer stands, Mr. Wren. Think on it." He tipped his hat again and rode off, his men following like shadows. Willie watched them go, the dust settling behind them. He knew with a chilling certainty that this was only the beginning. The world he had tried so hard to shut out was no longer just knocking at his door. It was testing his fences. The visit from Silas Kane left a residue of unease that clung to the ranch like morning fog. Willie found himself watching the ridge lines more often, his senses on high alert. He began wearing his Colt again, the familiar weight, a cold comfort against his hip. He didn't tell Mira about Kane's visit or his veiled threat. What could he say that a smooth-talking stranger wanted his land and seemed to take an unnerving interest in her? It would only frighten her, and she was already a ship without an anchor. His internal conflict deepened. He had lied to protect her. But what if he was protecting a danger he couldn't comprehend? His promise to himself after Eliza's death had been simple: keep Rose safe. Everything else was secondary. Was Mira a part of that safety, or was she the greatest threat to it? The answer, it seemed, would not be long in coming. 2 weeks after the robbery, Sheriff Brody rode up the trail. He was a good man, honest and weary, his face a roadmap of the county's troubles. He dismounted heavily and accepted the cup of coffee Willie offered him on the porch. "Willie," he began, getting straight to the point as was his way. "That woman you've got staying with you. The one from the bank." Willie's posture stiffened. "Her name is Mira. She's helping with my daughter." Brody took a long sip of coffee. His eyes troubled. "I got a telegraph this morning. A federal marshal's inquiry. They're looking for a woman who escaped custody back east a few months ago. A suspected Confederate spy. last seen heading west. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. The description is close. Dark hair, medium-height scar on her neck. Willie's blood ran cold. He thought of the thin, pale line he'd seen on Mira's neck, a mark she couldn't explain. A bullet wound. They say she's an expert in infiltration and sabotage. Brody continued, his voice grim. She was part of a network that caused a lot of trouble for the Union Army. They want her for treason. The word hung in the air between them, ugly and final. Treason. Willie looked through the open doorway. Mira was at the kitchen table showing Rose how to braid strands of colorful yarn. Her head was bent the afternoon light, catching the gentle curve of her neck. He saw her patience, her quiet kindness, the way Rose looked at her with pure adoration. He saw the woman who had thrown herself in front of a bullet for his child. He couldn't reconcile that image with the hardened spy the marshal was hunting. Does this woman have a name? Willie asked, his own voice sounding distant to his ears. The telegraph didn't say. Just a description and a warning. She's considered armed and extremely dangerous. The sheriff looked Willie square in the eye. You need to tell me, Willie. Is it her? Have you seen a scar? This was the moment. The crossroads. He could tell the truth, hand her over to a fate she couldn't even remember, and his life would return to its quiet, lonely order. He would have kept his promise to keep Rose safe from all outside threats. Or he could lie. He could take this stranger's fate into his own hands, shielding her from a past she didn't know, and in doing so pull himself and his daughter deeper into the heart of the mystery. He thought of the locket with its impossible drawing of his own mountains. He thought of Rose's laughter, a sound he'd thought was lost to him forever. He met the sheriff's gaze without flinching. I've seen no scar, Brody. He said, the lie tasting like rust and commitment in his mouth. She's just a drifting woman who lost her way, frightened by her own shadow. She's no danger to anyone. Sheriff Brody searched his face for a long moment, his expression a mixture of doubt and relief. He knew Willie Wren was not a man given to falsehoods. All right, Willie, if you say so. He drained his coffee cup. But you be careful. There's something else. Silas Kane has been asking questions about her in town. Quietly, but he's asking. After the sheriff left, a profound silence settled over the ranch. Willie had crossed a line. He was no longer just a benefactor. He was a conspirator. He had officially committed himself to uncovering Mira's truth on his own terms, shielding her from the world until he knew what that truth was. He had chosen her, and whatever trouble came with her, over the simple, safe path. As he watched Mira through the window, he realized his decision had been made the moment she had shielded his daughter. The lie was just the confirmation of a debt he intended to honor, no matter the cost. The high country air grew colder, a sharp harbinger of the changing season. Silas Kane, however, did not wait for winter to make his next move. A few days after the sheriff's visit, Willie was mending a fence on the far side of his property when he heard it, a low rumble that grew into a thundering roar. He looked up to see his herd of cattle, 100 strong, stampeding down from the high pasture, their eyes wide with terror. They were headed directly for the deep ravine that cut through the north section of his land. No. The word was torn from his throat. His entire livelihood, the legacy he was trying to build for Rose, was about to plunge to its death. He spurred his horse, a powerful buckskin named Dust Devil, into a gallop, racing to head them off. But he was one man, and the herd was a panicked, unstoppable river of flesh and horn. As he drew closer, he saw them, 2 of Kane's men positioned on the ridge above, firing their pistols into the air to keep the cattle running in a frenzy. This was no accident. It was a calculated attack designed to ruin him. Rage, cold and pure, surged through him. He was about to charge toward the riders when another horse appeared, as if from nowhere, a streak of chestnut lightning closing the distance. It was Mira. She rode his mare Bess bareback, her dark hair flying behind her like a banner. She held no reins, guiding the horse, with nothing but pressure from her knees, her body moving in perfect sync with the animal. Willie stared dumbfounded. She rode with a skill and fearless grace he had only ever seen in the most seasoned horsebreakers. She didn't shout or wave her arms. Instead, she angled Bess toward the lead steer, a massive bull with horns like scythes. She leaned low over the mare's neck, her voice a low, calming croon that was somehow audible even over the thunder of hooves. She wasn't fighting the stampede. She was joining it, flowing with it, slowly, inexorably turning the tide. She nudged the lead steer's shoulder with her horse again and again, gently but firmly redirecting its path away from the ravine's edge. One of Kane's men on the ridge saw what she was doing and raised his rifle, taking aim. Willie didn't hesitate. He drew his Colt and fired a single warning shot that kicked up dirt just inches from the man's horse. The rider flinched, his aim spoiled, and both he and his partners, seeing they had been discovered, wheeled their horses around and disappeared over the ridge. With the immediate threat gone, Willie turned his full attention back to the herd. Following Mira's lead, he rode to the other side of the stampede, helping to flank the panicked animals. Together, without exchanging a single word, they worked as a seamless team. She anticipated his movements, and he matched her rhythm. Slowly, painstakingly, they guided the herd away from the ravine and into the broad, open meadow, where the cattle's frantic run slowed to a trot, then a walk, until finally they stood sides, heaving, exhausted, but safe. Silence descended, broken only by the panting of horses and the lowing of the spent herd. Mira slid off Bess's back, her legs trembling slightly. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright with an adrenaline she didn't seem to understand. Willie dismounted and walked toward her, his own heart still pounding. "Where in God's name did you learn to ride like that?" he asked, his voice rough with awe and suspicion. She looked at her hands, then at the horse, then back at him, her expression a mask of confusion. I don't know," she stammered. "My body just knew what to do. The horse, the noise, it felt familiar." His trust in her deepened, but so did the mystery. This was not the muscle memory of a simple farm girl. This was the instinct of someone who had spent countless hours in the saddle, likely in situations far more dangerous than this one. The spies watching from the ridge would have seen it too. They would report back to Kane that the amnesiac woman on the Wren Ranch was far more than she appeared. He walked over to her and placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm. "You saved them," he said, his gaze sweeping over the herd. "You saved everything." A flicker of pride, of self-recognition, lit her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't just a blank slate. She was a woman of tangible, formidable skill. She had acted, and in doing so had reclaimed a piece of herself. "We saved them," she corrected softly, as they stood there surrounded by the quiet herd under the vast Colorado sky. A new understanding passed between them. He had protected her with a lie, and she had protected his future with an instinct she couldn't name. Their fates were no longer just intertwined. They were forged together in the crucible of this new, undeclared war. Kane had meant to break him, but instead he had only revealed an unexpected and powerful ally in the woman called Mira. The aftermath of the stampede settled over the ranch, leaving behind a tense quiet. Mira's display of horsemanship had irrevocably changed the dynamic between them. Willie's suspicion was now tempered with a profound respect. He started to watch her not as a potential threat, but as a puzzle he was determined to solve. He saw her in flashes, the way she could track a deer through dense woods, her uncanny ability to predict the weather by the feel of the wind, the swift, efficient way she bandaged a cut on Rose's knee. These were not the skills of a drifter. They were the honed instincts of a survivor. Mira herself became more haunted. The incident had unlocked something within her, and her nights were now plagued by fragmented dreams. She would wake up in a cold sweat, the scent of wood smoke and damp earth in her nostrils, her heart pounding from a chase she couldn't remember. She spoke of these visions to Willie in hesitant whispers. "There are codes," she said one evening, staring into the flickering flames of the hearth. "Numbers and letters. I see them written on scraps of paper. I'm hiding them, sewing them into the hem of a cloak." She shuddered. "And there are night rides. The moon is my only light. I'm carrying something important. A message that could mean life or death." Most disturbing were the faces that swam in the darkness of her mind. "There's a woman," she murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration. "She's kind, with intelligent eyes. She's giving me instructions, her voice low and urgent. And there's a man. I can never see his face clearly, just his eyes. They're cold, cruel, like chips of ice." Willie listened, a growing unease coiling in his stomach. The pieces were starting to fit, forming a picture he wasn't sure he was ready to see. He thought of Eliza. His wife had been a school teacher before they married, a woman of books and quiet contemplation. Yet she had also possessed a fierce intelligence and a passionate belief in the Union cause during the war, often organizing donation drives and writing letters to soldiers. Could there have been more to her life than he ever knew? Driven by a new urgency, he began to search. He started in the attic, sifting through the dusty relics of his life with Eliza. He opened her old writing desk, a beautiful cherrywood piece he had built for her as a wedding gift. He ran his hands over its smooth surface, the familiar gesture bringing a fresh pang of grief. He had been through this desk a dozen times since her death, but now he was looking with new eyes. He pressed on every panel, tapped on every drawer, searching for anything out of the ordinary. His fingers found it by accident, a slight unevenness in the wood at the back of the bottom drawer. He pushed, and a section of the false bottom clicked open, revealing a hidden compartment no bigger than a book. His heart hammered against his ribs. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a small bundle of letters tied with a black ribbon, a single tintype photograph, and a small leather-bound ledger. With trembling hands, he lifted the photograph. It showed two women standing in front of what looked like a military encampment. One was his Eliza, younger, her expression serious and determined. The other woman standing beside her was a stranger with dark hair and a resolute set to her jaw. Though the photo was faded, the resemblance was undeniable. It was Mira. He sank into the nearby chair, the photograph shaking in his hand. They had known each other. His wife, whom he thought he had known completely, had shared a secret past with the amnesiac woman now sleeping under his roof. He opened the letters. They were written in a complex cipher, a jumble of numbers and symbols that meant nothing to him. But Mira's dream of codes flashed in his mind. He took the letters downstairs to the main room where Mira was mending one of his shirts by lamplight. "I found something," he said. His voice strained. He laid the photograph on the table in front of her. Mira gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She stared at the image, her eyes wide with a dawning, painful recognition. "The woman with the kind eyes," she whispered. "From my dreams. I knew her. Her name was Eliza." She looked up at Willie, her face pale. "Your wife." The confirmation hit Willie like a physical blow. He pushed the coded letters toward her. These were with the photo. "Can you read them?" She stared at the pages, her head tilted. At first, her expression was blank. Then, as if a key had turned in a long rusted lock, her fingers began to trace the symbols. "It's a book cipher," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "You need the right book. A shared text." Her eyes scanned the room, landing on the small collection of books on the mantelpiece. She walked over her movements, trance-like, and pulled one out. It was a worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets, a favorite of Eliza's. She opened it, her fingers flying across the pages, matching numbers from the letter to words in the book. Together, hunched over the table in the flickering light, they began to unravel the secret life of Eliza Wren. The letters spoke of safe houses, troop movements, and supply line vulnerabilities. They were intelligence reports sent from a network of spies operating deep in Confederate territory. And it quickly became clear that Eliza wasn't just a part of the network. She was running it. She was a spy master. Willie breathed the words, feeling foreign and unbelievable. And I was her courier. Mira added, her voice filled with awe. The best one she had, she writes here. M is faster than rumor and twice as reliable. She looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I wasn't a criminal. I was a soldier. They worked late into the night, piecing together the fragmented story. The final letter was the most chilling. It was dated just before the end of the war and detailed the downfall of a high-ranking Confederate officer, a major, whose cruelty and corruption were legendary. Eliza's network had uncovered evidence of his war crimes, executing prisoners and selling military supplies on the black market, and leaked it to his superiors. His career was destroyed, his name disgraced. The major's name was Silas Kane. The room went cold. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Kane wasn't in redemption for the land. He was here for revenge. He had spent the years since the war hunting down the people who had ruined him. And now he had found the last living link to that network, Mira. Mira's hand went to the small leather-bound book that had been in the hidden compartment with the letters. The ledger, she whispered, her eyes wide with understanding. This must be what he's after. Eliza must have kept records. Details of his crimes, names of witnesses. Willie took the ledger from her. It was also written in cipher, but they now had the key. He looked at Mira, the full weight of their situation crashing down on him. The fight was no longer about his ranch. It was about a hidden history, a buried war that had followed them into the peaceful solitude of his valley. It was about the legacy of the woman they had both loved, and the vengeance of the man who would stop at nothing to destroy it. The fight was for their lives. The discovery of the ledger changed everything. The quiet ranch was no longer a sanctuary, but the epicenter of a storm that had been gathering for over a decade. The knowledge of Eliza's secret life settled into Willie not as a betrayal, but as a profound, aching pride that reshaped his grief. The woman he had mourned was not just the gentle schoolteacher who loved sunsets. She was a hero, a silent warrior who had fought for her beliefs with ink and courage. And Mira was her trusted soldier. They spent the next day in a feverish state deciphering the ledger. The coded entries laid bare Silas Kane's depravity in cold, precise detail, dates, locations, and illicit transactions. It was a complete account of his downfall, the proof that would forever seal his disgrace. He doesn't just want to destroy it, Myra realized, her face grim. He needs it. If this ledger is the only evidence of his crimes, destroying it would allow him to rewrite his own history. He could clear his name, perhaps even reclaim a position of power, which means he knows you're the last person who would know where to find it. Willie finished the pieces falling into place with terrifying clarity. He's been testing us. The stampede wasn't just to intimidate me. It was to see if you would reveal any special skills. Your writing confirmed his suspicions. A new terrible thought dawned on him. Rose, he breathed, his blood turning to ice. As if summoned by his fear, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the yard, fast, too fast. Willie grabbed his rifle and ran to the door, Mira right behind him. One of Kane's men was galloping away from the barn, a small, struggling figure held in front of him on the saddle. Rose, Papa, her terrified shriek was carried back on the wind. No! Willie roared, a sound of pure primal rage. He raised his rifle, but the rider was already disappearing into the thicket of aspens down the trail, using his own daughter as a shield. Another of Cain's men, a brutish man with a scarred face, stepped out from behind the barn, a pistol leveled at Willie. "Don't even think about it, Wren," he sneered. "Mr. Cain wants a trade. The girl for the book." Mira stepped forward, her amnesiac hesitation completely gone, replaced by the cool, steady resolve of a seasoned operative. Where she demanded, her voice ringing with authority, "The old mission at the edge of your property?" The man said, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "At sunset." "Come alone," he said, his eyes fixed on Mira. "Just you and the ledger. If we see him," he jerked his chin toward Willie, "the girl pays the price." He backed away slowly, mounted his horse, and vanished into the trees. Willie's world tilted on its axis. His daughter, his only reason for living, was in the hands of a monster. He felt a helplessness so profound it threatened to swallow him whole. Mira placed a firm hand on his arm. Her moss-green eyes were clear and sharp, burning with an intensity he had never seen before. "Willie, look at me." He forced his gaze to meet hers. "Panic is a luxury we don't have. We are going to get her back." "He said you have to go alone," Willie said, his voice choked. "He thinks I'm just a courier." She countered, her mind already working, calculating. "He doesn't know what else Eliza taught me." She looked toward the abandoned mission visible on a distant bluff. "That mission? Why there?" "It's been deserted for years," Willie said, trying to force his own mind to work. "Eliza used to go there sometimes." She said the quiet helped her think. Mira's eyes widened. "It wasn't for the quiet, Willie. It was a dead drop, a safe location. I've been there before. I remember it now. There are tunnels beneath it, old cellars used by the monks. It was our emergency rendezvous point." Hope, fragile but fierce, flickered in Willie's chest. She wasn't just walking into a trap. She was walking onto her own ground. "He doesn't know that you'll be there," she said, a plan forming behind her eyes. "He told me to come alone. He'll be watching for you on the main trail. But there's another way to the mission, isn't there, along the creek bed, hidden from the bluff?" He nodded slowly. "It's a hard climb, dangerous. We don't have another choice," she said. She grabbed the leather-bound ledger from the table. "I will go, as he asked. I will walk up the main trail with this. I will be his focus. You will take the creek bed. You will get inside the mission before I ever get there. You will find Rose." Her gaze was resolute. "I am the bait, Willie. You are the trap." He looked at her, this woman who had been a ghost, a mystery, a fragile survivor. In her place stood a strategist, a soldier, his partner. He gave a single sharp nod. The sun was already beginning its descent, painting the sky in fiery streaks of orange and red. Sunset was coming, and with it, the final confrontation. The heavens themselves seemed to sense the coming conflict. A storm, which had been lurking behind the peaks all day, began to roll in its bruised purple belly, rumbling with distant thunder. The wind rose, howling through the pines, whipping Mira's hair across her face as she walked the long, exposed trail toward the mission. She clutched the ledger to her chest, her steps measured and deliberate. She was a solitary figure, a perfect target drawing all eyes to her. Meanwhile, Willie moved like a wraith through the shadows of the creek bed below. The climb was treacherous, the rocks slick with the first drops of rain. His lungs burned and his muscles screamed in protest, but the image of Rose's terrified face propelled him forward. He was not just a rancher anymore. He was a father fighting for the life of his child, and that primal drive gave him a strength he didn't know he possessed. He reached the back of the mission, a crumbling adobe wall covered in ivy, just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. As Mira had predicted, an old iron-gated entrance to the cellars was hidden behind a tangle of overgrown bushes. The lock was rusted through, and he broke it with a single sharp kick. He slipped into the musty darkness beneath the church, his Colt drawn. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. He moved silently through the labyrinthine cellars, guided by a faint shaft of light from above. He found a stone staircase leading up and emerged behind the main altar, shielded by shadows and crumbling statuary. The main sanctuary was a cavern of deepening gloom. Rain lashed against the broken, stained glass windows, and the wind moaned through the holes in the roof. Silas Kane stood in the center of the room. His elegant coat soaked his face, illuminated by the flickering light of a single lantern. One of his men held Rose, whose small whimpers were nearly lost in the growing storm. "She's taking her time," Kane said, his smooth voice laced with impatience. Suddenly, the heavy main doors of the mission groaned open. Mira stood silhouetted against the stormy twilight, the ledger held out in front of her. "I'm here, Kane," she said, her voice steady and clear, carrying over the howl of the wind. "Let the child go." Kane laughed, a chilling, ugly sound. "You are in no position to make demands, my dear courier. First, the ledger." He gestured for her to bring it to him. As Mira started walking forward, a brilliant fork of lightning illuminated the sanctuary, freezing the scene like a photograph. In that flash, her eyes met Willie's across the cavernous space. It was the signal. Mira suddenly stumbled, crying out as if she had twisted her ankle. As she fell, she threw the ledger not toward Kane, but into a dark corner near a pile of dry, rotting timbers. It was the diversion. Kane's men, their greed overriding their caution, instinctively moved toward the book. At that exact moment, Willie stepped out from behind the altar. "Looking for this," he said, his voice a low growl. He held up another book, Eliza's copy of Shakespeare's sonnets. For a split second, Kane's men were confused, their attention divided. It was all the time Willie needed. He fired his Colt not to kill, but to disarm. His first shot struck the pistol from the hand of the man nearest the ledger. His second sent the man holding Rose stumbling backward with a yelp of pain, his arm suddenly useless. Rose broke free and ran. "Papa, get her," Willie, Mira screamed. As Willie lunged for his daughter, Kane finally reacted, his handsome face contorted into a mask of pure fury. He drew his own pistol and fired at Mira. But Mira was already moving, diving behind a row of splintered pews. Using her knowledge of the mission's layout, she created chaos, knocking over a candelabra, its remaining candles scattering across the dry floor. The man holding Rose recovered and charged Willie. The two men crashed together in a brutal, desperate struggle. Willie, powered by a father's rage, fought with a ferocity that stunned his opponent, finally landing a blow that sent the man crumpling to the floor. He scooped Rose into his arms, shielding her behind the stone altar. Across the room, flames began to lick up the dry timbers where Mira had thrown the ledger. A fire started by the fallen candles was spreading with terrifying speed, smoke beginning to choke the air. The mission was becoming a death trap. The ledger, Kane screamed, his composure finally shattering. He ran toward the flames, but Mira intercepted him. She moved with a fluid, deadly grace, using a broken piece of pew as a weapon. They circled each other in the demonic light of the spreading fire, a spy and her vengeful ghost. It was Eliza, wasn't it? Kane snarled, lunging at her. She was the one who pulled the strings. She personally orchestrated my ruin. She fought for what was right. Mira retorted, parrying his attack. Something you would never understand. As they fought, Willie, with Rose clinging to his back, engaged the last of Kane's men. The storm raged outside, the mission burned from within, and in the heart of the chaos, the final battle was waged. Willie managed to subdue the last henchman, then turned to help Mira. Kane, seeing he was outnumbered, and that the ledger was about to be consumed by flames, made a last desperate move. He kicked over the lantern, spreading the fire and creating a wall of flame between them. "This isn't over," he shrieked, and ran for a side door, disappearing into the storm. "Let him go," Willie said, grabbing Mira's arm. "We have to get Rose out." Flames were now consuming the roof, timbers groaning as they threatened to collapse. Willie led the way with Mira right behind him, protecting their retreat. They burst out of the mission's side entrance, just as the main bell tower, weakened by the fire, crashed to the ground in a shower of sparks and smoke. They huddled together in the driving rain, watching the mission burn. Rose was safe, sobbing in Willie's arms. The ledger and the dark history it contained was turning to ash. They had won. They had survived. They were free. The fire consumed the old mission throughout the night, its hungry orange glow a beacon against the storm-blackened sky. By dawn, the rain had ceased, leaving behind a world washed clean. All that remained of the mission was a smoking skeletal ruin. Willie, Mira, and Rose had taken shelter in a small line shack overnight, and as the sun rose, they walked back to the site. The air smelled of wet ash and pine. Amidst the charred rubble, Willie's gaze fell upon the stone altar. It had survived the collapse, a solitary island of white in a sea of black. Drawn by an instinct he couldn't name, he walked toward it. He ran his hand over the scorched stone and felt a small, loose block near the base. Prying it open, he found a small, oilskin-wrapped package tucked inside a hollowed-out cavity. He unwrapped it carefully. It wasn't the ledger Kane had been after. It was another smaller journal, and tucked inside its pages was a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Eliza's. He read it aloud, his voice thick with emotion, as Mira stood beside him, her hand resting on his arm. My dearest Willie, if you are reading this, it means the worst has come to pass, and our quiet life has been disturbed by the ghosts of a war I prayed I had left behind. There is so much I never told you, not from a lack of love or trust, but from a desperate desire to protect you and the peace we built here. I was not just a school teacher. I commanded a network of brave souls who risked everything for the Union, and Mira was the bravest of them all. Forgive me my secrets, but know that every dangerous choice I made was to build a better, safer world for families like ours. The ledger Kane seeks is a decoy I planted long ago. This journal, the true one, contains not a record of his crimes, but a list of the heroes I worked with, names of ordinary people who did extraordinary things. It is a record of courage, not of hate. Guard it well. My love for you and for our Rose is the truest thing in my life. It is the North Star I always followed home. Tears streamed down Willie's face as he finished reading. The weight of his grief so long, a burden of loss, transformed into an understanding so profound it was almost painful. He had not lost a simple woman. He had loved a giant. His love for her memory deepened, enriched by the truth of her incredible courage. He looked at Mira, whose own eyes were filled with tears for the friend and commander she had lost twice, once to death and once to amnesia. She brought us together, Mira whispered, even after she was gone. He nodded, tucking the journal safely inside his coat. She trusted us to finish her work, to build that safer world she talked about. They stood in the quiet ruins, the shared past of a woman they both loved, binding them together. Later that day, back at the ranch, they talked. With her memory fully restored, Mira spoke of her life before, of the cause she had fought for, and of the weariness that came after. I could disappear, she said, looking out at the mountains. Find a new name, a new place where no one knows me. It would be safer for you and Rose. Kane is still out there. Willie took her hand, his calloused palm enveloping hers. He's a coward who runs from a fair fight. His power was in his secrets, and we burned them to the ground. He has nothing left. But we do. He looked around his home, at his daughter playing on the floor, at the woman who had filled the empty spaces in their lives. This isn't just my home anymore, Mira. It's ours, if you'll have it. Her choice was clear. She would not run from the ghosts of her past any longer. She would stay and face the future, whatever it might hold, with the family she had found. The town of redemption, upon hearing the true story from Sheriff Brody pieced together from the capture of Kane's injured men, embraced Mira not as a suspected traitor, but as a war hero. The bounty was rescinded and her name was cleared. She was no longer a stranger, but one of their own. 1 year later, the Colorado High Country was alive, with the sounds of a new beginning. Where the burnt-out mission had once stood as a monument to secrets and violence, a new structure now rose. It was built of fresh-cut pine and sturdy river stone with large windows that let in the bright mountain light. Willie and Mira, now married, had rebuilt it, not as a church, but as the valley's first schoolhouse. A small crowd of ranchers, trappers, and townsfolk gathered in the crisp autumn air for its dedication. Mira stood at the front her past, as a courier traded for a future as a teacher. She looked out at the faces of the children, their eyes bright with curiosity, and felt a sense of peace that was deeper and more profound than any she had ever known. Willie stood beside her, his arm wrapped firmly around her waist. He had spent the year not just building a school, but rebuilding his own life, filling it with purpose and a new quiet joy. He had hung a new gleaming brass bell in the newly constructed tower. He reached up and took the rope. Mira placed her hand over his. Together, they pulled. The clear, resonant sound of the bell rang out, echoing across the valley. It was a sound of hope, a symbol of their new life, built not on the ashes of the past, but on the solid foundations of courage, truth, and love. Rose stood between them, her small hands holding tightly to both of theirs, her face tilted up toward the sound of the future.